Your belly fat isn't just making your clothes tight. It's actively killing you from the inside right now. I'm not talking about the fat you pinch. I'm talking about visceral fat, the deep abdominal fat wrapped around your liver, your pancreas, your intestines, even your heart. And this fat is producing inflammatory molecules every single second, flooding your bloodstream with compounds that accelerate aging, promote disease, and shorten your lifespan. 88% of American adults have some degree of metabolic dysfunction, and visceral fat is driving much of it. Even worse, you can have a normal BMI, look relatively thin, and still be carrying dangerous levels of this toxic fat. You can't see it in the mirror, you can't pinch it with your fingers, but it's there, silently damaging your organs. This isn't about vanity. This is about preventing heart disease, reversing diabetes risk, and protecting your brain from dementia decades from now. I've reviewed peer-reviewed studies published in 2023, 2024, and 2025 on visceral fat loss. Today, I'm breaking down the fastest proven method to burn this dangerous fat and what the science actually shows works. And I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. It's not what most fitness influencers are telling you. First, you need to understand exactly what we're fighting here. Visceral fat is anatomically different from the subcutaneous fat you can grab with your hands. Subcutaneous fat sits right under your skin, on your arms, your thighs, your hips. That's the fat you can pinch. Visceral fat sits deep in your abdominal cavity, surrounding your vital organ. And here's why location matters so much. Your intestines drain blood through something called the portal vein, which goes directly to your liver. Any inflammatory molecules or free fatty acids released by visceral fat get delivered straight to your liver at high concentrations. This is why visceral fat is so metabolically dangerous. It has a direct highway to your most important metabolic organ. Now, here's what makes visceral fat truly dangerous. It's not inert storage. It's metabolically active tissue that functions like an endocrine organ, constantly producing and secreting molecules that affect your entire body. Visceral fat releases inflammatory cytokines, specifically interleukin-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and C-reactive protein. Think of these as distress signals your fat tissue sends throughout your body. These molecules travel through your bloodstream, landing in your blood vessels, your brain, your heart, your muscles. Everywhere they go, they trigger inflammation. This creates a chronic inflammatory state, not the acute inflammation you get when you cut your finger and your immune system rushes in to heal the wound. That's beneficial. This is chronic, low-grade inflammation that never shuts off. Your immune system is constantly activated at a low level, slowly damaging tissues over time. This is why visceral fat dramatically increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. The inflammatory molecules released by visceral fat directly promote atherosclerosis, the buildup of plaques in your arteries. Studies show that people with high amounts of visceral fat have significantly more pericardial fat, which is fat that surrounds the heart. This pericardial fat releases inflammatory compounds directly into the heart muscle and coronary artery, accelerating plaque formation. For diabetes, the mechanism is even more direct. Visceral fat dumps free fatty acids into your portal vein, which floods your liver. Your liver becomes insulin resistant first. It stops responding properly to insulin signals, so it keeps producing glucose even when your blood sugar is already high. This drives up your insulin levels even further, creating a vicious cycle. Eventually, your pancreas can't keep up with the demand for more and more insulin, and you develop type 2 diabetes. But here's something most people don't know. Visceral fat in midlife predicts Alzheimer's disease 15 to 20 years before you develop any cognitive symptoms. Recent brain imaging studies found that people with higher amounts of visceral fat have increased deposits of beta amyloid plaques and tau tangles, the hallmark proteins of Alzheimer's, accumulating in their brains decades before symptoms appear. The mechanism involves chronic inflammation crossing the blood-brain barrier, reduced cerebral blood flow, and insulin resistance in the brain itself. Some researchers now call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because of this insulin connection. Visceral fat also increases cancer risk. The inflammatory environment and elevated insulin levels create ideal conditions for tumor growth. Studies show links between visceral fat and colorectal, breast, ovarian, and pancreatic cancers. Now, here's something you need to understand about how this fat accumulates. There's a specific phenotype, a physical appearance, that signals visceral fat accumulation. From the back, someone with high visceral fat often looks relatively lean, but from the side, you see a protruding belly. The waist is significantly increased, but there's not a lot of fat on the arms, legs, or hips. This This is the classic presentation of hyperinsulinemia, chronically elevated insulin level. Why does this pattern develop? Because insulin is a storage hormone. When your insulin levels are chronically high, usually from eating too many refined carbohydrates and sugars too frequently, your body is constantly in storage mode. Insulin signals your fat cells to take up glucose and store it as fat. And visceral fat cells are particularly sensitive to insulin's storage signal. This is why someone with this insulin-driven fat accumulation pattern will go on a cruise, eat more food, and come back 5 to 10 pounds heavier. Their insulin levels are already so high that any extra food gets rapidly stored as fat. And it's incredibly difficult for them to lose weight with traditional calorie restriction because their hormonal environment is working against them. And let's talk about why simply cutting calories isn't the fastest or most effective approach. When you create a calorie deficit through traditional dieting, eating less but maintaining the same meal frequency, your body perceives this as a threat. Your metabolic rate slows down as an adaptive response. Your thyroid hormone production decreases. Your body starts breaking down both fat and muscle tissue to meet its energy needs. You lose weight, yes, but you're losing lean mass along with fat. This is why people who diet without proper strategy often end up skinny fat, lower weight, but higher body fat percentage and poor muscle mass. Your hunger hormones shift dramatically. Leptin, which signals satiety, drops. Ghrelin, which signals hunger, increases. You become ravenously hungry, making the diet extremely difficult to sustain. And when you inevitably can't maintain that level of restriction, you regain the weight, often more than you lost. But fasting triggers a different physiological response. And this is where the science gets fascinating. When you eat, especially carbohydrates and to a lesser extent protein, your pancreas releases insulin into your bloodstream. Insulin's job is to help your cells take up glucose for energy and to signal fat cells to store any excess energy. On the molecular level, here's what insulin does to keep fat locked inside your fat cell. Insulin binds to receptors on the surface of your adipocytes, your fat cell. This triggers a signaling cascade inside the cell that activates an enzyme called phosphodiesterase 3b. This enzyme breaks down cyclic AMP, which is a crucial signaling molecule inside the cell. When CAMP levels drop, another enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase stays inactive. HSL is the enzyme responsible for breaking apart triglyceride, the stored form of fat, into free fatty acids that can be released from the cell and burned for energy. There's also adipose triglyceride lipase, or ATGL, which initiates this process. Both of these enzymes need low insulin and high CAMP to function. Think of insulin like a padlock on your fat storage vault. As long as insulin levels are elevated, that padlock stays locked. Your stored fat cannot be accessed. It doesn't matter how few calories you're eating. If your insulin is high multiple times per day from frequent eating, you're making it biochemically difficult for your body to mobilize stored fat.
Now, here's what happens when you fast. When you stop eating and extend the time between meals, your insulin levels drop. After about 12 hours of fasting, your insulin reaches very low level. This removes the brake on fat mobilization. With insulin low, CAMP levels rise inside your adipocytes. Rising CAMP activates protein kinase A, which phosphorylates hormone-sensitive lipase and also phosphorylates paralipin, a protein that coats the surface of fat droplets inside your cells. When paralipin is phosphorylated, it allows HSL and ATGL to access the stored triglycerides. These enzymes now break apart the triglycerides into glycerol and free fatty acids. The free fatty acids are released from the fat cell into your bloodstream, where they travel to your liver, your muscles, and other tissues to be burned for energy through a process called beta oxidation inside your mitochondria. This is lipolysis, the mobilization and breakdown of stored fat, and it can only happen efficiently when insulin is low. Now, here's the critical part that explains why fasting specifically targets visceral fat first. Visceral adipocytes have a higher density of beta-adrenergic receptors compared to subcutaneous fat cells. These receptors respond to catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline, which are released during fasting and exercise. When these hormones bind to to beta-adrenergic receptors, they amplify the lipolytic signal. They increase CAMP even more, which further activates HSL and ATGL. Visceral fat cells are biochemically primed to release fat faster than subcutaneous fat cells. They have higher basal lipolysis rates. This is why, when you create the right hormonal environment through fasting, visceral fat is mobilized first. This isn't just theory. Dr. Pradeep Yamdas, an interventional cardiologist with decades of clinical experience, explains it this way. After 12 hours of fasting, you start pulling the fat out, and the first place the fat comes out of is going to be visceral fat. That is why fasting benefits you so much, because it gets rid of that worst fat, the fat that is very inflammatory. After 12 to 16 hours of fasting, something else remarkable happens. Your liver begins converting free fatty acids into ketone bodies, specifically beta-hydroxybutyrate, acetoacetate, and acetone. This is ketogenesis. Ketones are an alternative fuel source to glucose. Your brain, which normally relies heavily on glucose, can run very efficiently on ketones. In fact, ketones produce less oxidative stress than glucose metabolism. When your mitochondria burn ketones for energy, they generate fewer reactive oxygen species, those damaging molecules that contribute to cellular aging and inflammation. Think of this like switching your car from regular gasoline to premium electric power. Cleaner combustion, less exhaust, more efficiency. But ketones do more than just provide energy. They're signaling molecules. Beta-hydroxybutyrate activates pathways in your brain that increase production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. BDNF is like fertilizer for your brain. It promotes the growth of new neurons, enhances synaptic plasticity, and improves cognitive function. This is why many people report exceptional mental clarity during extended fasts. Your brain is literally becoming more capable. Ketones also inhibit the NLRP3 inflammasome, which is a key driver of inflammatory responses. By producing ketones through fasting, you're actively reducing systemic inflammation, the same inflammation being driven by your visceral fat. Now let's look at what the research actually shows about time-restricted eating and visceral fat loss. Studies using 16-8 time-restricted eating, 16 hours of fasting with an 8-hour eating window, have shown visceral fat reductions ranging from 11 to 27% over periods of 5 to 48 weeks in overweight and obese subjects. A 6-week intervention study found statistically significant reductions in visceral fat mass, particularly in men. Importantly, these studies show that time-restricted eating maintains lean muscle mass better than continuous calorie restriction. When total calories are equal, the group doing time-restricted eating loses more fat and preserves more muscle compared to the group eating the same calorie spread throughout the day. However, I need to be honest with you about the nuance in the evidence. A recent 2025 study in Nature Medicine found that time-restricted eating did not reduce visceral fat more than a standard Mediterranean diet alone when both groups received nutritional education. What does this tell us? Time-restricted eating isn't magic on its own. It works primarily through two mechanisms. It makes it easier to create a sustained caloric deficit by limiting your eating window, and it improves insulin sensitivity by keeping insulin low for extended periods. The 16-8 protocol is optimal because 16 hours gives you sufficient time for insulin to drop low enough for sustained lipolysis. The first 12 hours deplete your glycogen stores, the glucose stored in your liver and muscle. Once glycogen is depleted, your body must turn to fat for fuel. Hours 12 through 16 are peak fat mobilization time. This is when ketone production begins ramping up. The 8-hour eating window is sustainable for most people. It fits into normal life. A common schedule is eating between noon and 8 p.m., which means skipping breakfast or having a late breakfast. During your fasting window, you can consume black coffee, tea, and water, anything with 0 calories. The moment you consume calories, even from cream in your coffee or a handful of nuts, you break the fast. Insulin will rise and the fat-burning window closes. Dr. Yamdas recommends a progression for beginners. Start with 12-12, 12 hours of fasting, 12 hours of eating. Do this for 2 or 3 weeks to adapt, then progress to 16-8. If you're dealing with significant metabolic dysfunction, obesity, or type 2 diabetes, you might eventually progress to 18-6 or even include periodic 24-hour fasts once you're adapted. But time-restricted eating alone isn't the complete picture. To maximize visceral fat loss. To make this the fastest possible, you need to add exercise. And not just any exercise. Here's where the synergy happens. When you combine fasting with properly timed exercise, you create a metabolic environment that maximizes fat mobilization and oxidation. The key is exercising during your fasted state, particularly toward the end of your fasting window. Let's say you're breaking your fast at 6 p.m. If you exercise at 4 p.m., you're training at the peak of your fast when insulin is at its lowest and fat mobilization is already high. When you exercise in this state, your body releases a surge of catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline. These hormones bind to those beta-adrenergic receptors on your fat cells, amplifying the lipolytic signal even further. They're stacking low insulin plus high catecholamines. This is the biochemical combination that produces maximum lipolysis. Your contracting muscles also act like glucose sponges during and after exercise. They pull glucose from your bloodstream through insulin-independent pathways. This is critical. Muscle contraction activates GLUT4 transporters, proteins that bring glucose into muscle cells, without requiring insulin. So you're clearing glucose from your bloodstream and using it for energy in your muscles, which keeps insulin low and allows fat burning to continue. After resistance training, your muscles remain insulin sensitive for hours. This means when you do eat, the nutrients you consume are preferentially shuttled into muscle tissue for repair and growth rather than being stored as fat. This is nutrient partitioning, directing calories toward muscle building rather than fat storage. Now let's talk about resistance training specifically, because this is non-negotiable if you want to maximize visceral fat loss while preserving or building muscle. A study on metabolic syndrome patients found that high-resistance training induced faster visceral fat loss than moderate endurance training. Why? Because building and maintaining muscle mass fundamentally changes your metabolic rate. Every pound of muscle you carry burns approximately 50 to 100 calories per day at rest just to maintain itself. This is your resting metabolic rate. When you lose weight through diet alone without resistance training, you lose both fat and muscle. Your metabolic rate drops. This is why people hit plateaus and why weight regain is so common. But when you perform progressive resistance training during fat loss, you preserve your muscle mass or even build new muscle. Your metabolic rate stays elevated or increases. You're burning more calories 24 hours a day even while you sleep. The mechanism involves 3 layers. First, during resistance training, your muscle fibers contract against heavy resistance. This depletes the glycogen stored locally in those muscles. Second, this depletion signals your muscle cells to upregulate GLUT4 transporters on their surface. More GLUT4 means more capacity to pull glucose out of your bloodstream. Third, this increased insulin sensitivity in muscle tissue means glucose is directed toward muscle rather than fat storage. Your protocol should be resistance training 2 to 3 times per week minimum. Deadlifts, presses, rows. These movements recruit the most muscle mass, create the greatest metabolic demand, and produce the strongest hormonal response. You want progressive overload, gradually increasing the weight, reps, or volume over time. This is what forces your muscles to adapt and grow. 3 sets of 6 to 12 repetitions per exercise is the standard range for hypertrophy and strength. Now let's talk about high-intensity interval training, or HIIT. Studies show HIIT significantly reduces total abdominal and visceral fat mass. Interestingly, running-based HIIT appears more effective than cycling-based HIIT for visceral fat reduction specifically. But here's an important caveat from the research. A 2023 meta-analysis found that HIIT is not superior to continuous moderate-intensity aerobic exercise in reducing body fat or visceral fat when total energy expenditure is matched. What does this mean? HIIT isn't magic. Its advantage is time efficiency. You can burn the same number of calories in 20 to 30 minutes with HIIT that might take 45 to 60 minutes with steady-state cardio. The mechanism behind HIIT's effectiveness involves excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, or EPOC, the afterburn effect. When you perform intense intervals, you create an oxygen debt. Your body has to work hard after after the workout is over to restore homeostasis, clear lactate, replenish phosphocreatine stores, repair tissue, return heart rate and breathing to baseline. This extended elevated metabolic rate means you continue burning calories for 24 to 48 hours after your HIIT session. Additionally, the catecholamine response during and after HIIT is more prolonged than with steady-state cardio. Your fat cells continue receiving the signal to release stored fat well after your workout ends. Your HIIT protocol should be 2 sessions per week, 20 to 30 minutes total. An example, 30 seconds of all-out effort, sprinting, burpees, jump squats, followed by 90 seconds of recovery. Repeat for 8 to 10 rounds. The intensity during the work interval should be near maximal. If you can hold a conversation during the work interval, you're not going hard enough. But don't overlook walking. This is the underrated secret weapon for visceral fat loss. Meta-analyses show that aerobic exercise combined with energy restriction most effectively promotes visceral adipose tissue loss. Walking is aerobic activity that almost anyone can do daily. It burns calories, increases your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, your NEAT, and doesn't spike cortisol the way prolonged intense exercise can. High cortisol from overtraining can actually promote visceral fat storage. Walking provides the fat-burning benefits of movement without the stress hormone elevation. Target 8,000 to 10,000 steps daily. This is sustainable, it fits into your life, and it adds up to significant caloric expenditure over time. The timing advice from Dr. Jamnadas is worth emphasizing. Exercise at the peak of your fast, ideally 2 to 3 hours before you break your fast. He notes that exercising in a fasted state while insulin is low produces higher growth hormone levels. Growth hormone is anabolic. It helps build muscle and burn fat simultaneously, which is normally physiologically difficult to achieve. Many people worry they won't have energy to train in a fasted state. The first few sessions might feel challenging as your body adapts, but once you're fat adapted, once your body becomes efficient at mobilizing and burning fat for fuel, you'll find your energy during fasted training is actually superior to fed training. There's no blood sugar crash, no digestive demands pulling blood away from your muscles, just clean, steady energy from ketones and fatty acids. Exercise and fasting create the metabolic environment for fat loss, but if your other hormones are dysregulated, you'll be fighting an uphill battle. Let's talk about sleep and stress, the two factors most people overlook. Sleep deprivation directly sabotages fat loss, particularly visceral fat loss, through multiple hormonal pathways. Just 4 nights of poor sleep reduces insulin sensitivity by 30%. Think about what this means. Your cells become resistant to insulin signals, so your pancreas pumps out more insulin. Higher insulin levels mean the fat storage padlock stays locked more of the time. Even if you're doing everything else right, fasting, exercising, chronically elevated insulin from poor sleep prevents optimal fat mobilization. Poor sleep also dramatically alters your hunger hormones. Ghrelin, which signals hunger, increases by 28%. Leptin, which signals satiety and fullness, drops by 18%. You wake up after a bad night's sleep feeling ravenously hungry, and your brain is less able to recognize when you've eaten enough. This isn't a willpower problem. This is hormonal sabotage. The mechanism behind sleep and visceral fat involves cortisol. When you don't sleep enough, your cortisol levels remain elevated throughout the day instead of following the normal circadian rhythm, high in the morning, low at night. Chronically elevated cortisol does several things. First, it promotes glucose release from your liver. Your blood sugar goes up, insulin spikes in response, and you get the same fat storage signal. But cortisol also directly activates visceral fat storage receptors. Cortisol essentially tells your body, we're under threat. Store energy around the organs where we can access it quickly. This is an evolutionary mechanism. In times of chronic stress, famine, predators, constant physical demands, storing visceral fat was adaptive. It provided readily available energy. But in modern life, chronic stress from sleep deprivation and psychological stress creates the exact same hormonal signal without the actual physical threat. Deep sleep is also when growth hormone is released. Growth hormone peaks between 1 and 2 a.m. during deep non-REM sleep. Growth hormone is crucial for maintaining muscle mass, promoting fat oxidation, and supporting cellular repair. If you're not getting enough deep sleep, you're missing this anabolic window. Sleep is also when autophagy, cellular cleanup and repair, happens most efficiently. Your cells are identifying damaged organelles, misfolded proteins, and cellular debris, packaging them up and breaking them down for recycling. This is critical for maintaining healthy, efficient mitochondria. Damaged mitochondria produce more oxidative stress and less ATP. You feel tired, sluggish, and your fat-burning capacity is impaired. Your sleep target should be 7 to 9 hours per night with consistent timing. Your circadian rhythm, your internal biological clock, thrives on consistency. Going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, even on weekends, optimizes your hormonal rhythms. Practical interventions. Get morning sunlight exposure within the first hour of waking. This sets your circadian clock and improves nighttime melatonin release. In the evening, minimize blue light exposure for at least 1 hour before bed. Blue light from screens suppresses melatonin production, making it harder to fall asleep and reducing sleep quality. Now let's talk about stress management, because chronic psychological stress creates the exact same cortisol-driven visceral fat accumulation, even if your diet and exercise are perfect. When you experience chronic stress, work pressure, relationship problems, financial worry, constantly checking your phone, your body maintains elevated cortisol. This sustained high cortisol promotes glucose release from the liver. Glucose spikes, insulin spikes in response, and you get the same fat storage signal. But cortisol also directly activates visceral fat storage receptors. Cortisol essentially tells your body, we're under threat. Store energy around the organs where we can access it quickly. This is an evolutionary mechanism. In times of chronic stress, famine, predators, constant physical demands, storing visceral fat was adaptive. It provided readily available energy. But in modern life, chronic stress from sleep deprivation and psychological stress creates the exact same hormonal signal without the actual physical threat. Now let me give you the complete 12-week protocol that integrates everything we've discussed. This is your roadmap. Weeks 1 to 3, adaptation. Start with 12-12 time-restricted eating. 12 hours of fasting, 12 hours of eating. This is gentle enough that most people adapt without significant hunger or energy issues. Choose an eating window that fits your life. For example, if your last meal is at 8 p.m., break your fast at 8 a.m. the next morning. During your fasting window, consume only black coffee, tea, or water, 0 calories. The moment you consume calories, insulin rises and the fast is broken. During your eating window, prioritize protein and fiber. Your protein target should be 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight daily. Protein is the most satiating macronutrient. It keeps you full longer and prevents muscle loss during fat loss. Fiber slows digestion, stabilizes blood sugar, and feeds your beneficial gut bacteria. Eliminate added sugars and refined carbohydrates. These are the primary drivers of insulin spikes. When you do eat carbohydrates, choose whole food sources, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains that come with fiber and nutrients. For exercise during this phase, start with resistance training twice per week. Focus on learning proper form on compound movements. Your goal is building the habit and mastering technique. Also target 6,000 steps daily minimum through walking. Before you start, take baseline measurements. Measure your waist circumference at your belly button. Take your weight, but lock in your sleep schedule. 7 to 9 hours, same bedtime and wake time every day. Implement your evening wind-down routine. No blue light 1 hour before bed. Dim lights, cool room temperature. Weeks 9 to 12, optimization. If you're responding well and feel comfortable, you can experiment with 18-6 or even 24 time-restricted eating 2 to 3 days per week. Dr. Jim Nuss also recommends that once you've reached your goal, incorporate 1 24-hour fast per month for maintenance. This provides a deeper reset for insulin sensitivity and autophagy. Continue 3 times per week resistance training with progressive overload, gradually increasing the weight you're lifting. Continue 2 times per week HIIT. Maintain your daily walking. At the end of 12 weeks, remeasure everything. Waist circumference is your primary indicator of visceral fat loss. Research shows you can expect an 11 to 27% reduction in visceral fat with this protocol. You should see your waist circumference decrease by 2 to 4 inches. Your weight might drop 1 to 2 pounds per week, but remember, you might be building muscle simultaneously, which can offset some of the fat loss on the scale. Your energy levels should be higher, not lower. If you're feeling exhausted or extremely hungry, you need to adjust. Either shorten your fasting window, increase your calories slightly, or reduce your training volume. This protocol should feel sustainable. What success actually looks like: your waist is shrinking, your clothes fit differently, your energy is stable throughout the day without crashes, your sleep quality improves, and if you tested fasting insulin at baseline, it should be normalizing. Timeline expectations: weeks 1 to 2, you're adapting. You might feel some fatigue or hunger as your body adjusts to using fat for fuel. Weeks 3 to 4, your energy improves and you start seeing the first visual changes. Weeks 5 to 8, this is accelerated fat loss. You're fully adapted, fat burning is efficient, and the changes become obvious. Weeks 9 to 12, you're in full body recomposition mode, losing fat, building muscle, looking significantly different. Before we close, I want to touch on some deeper benefits of fasting that go beyond just fat loss. Understanding these mechanisms helps you appreciate why fasting is so powerful. First, autophagy, cellular cleanup. When you fast, your cells sense that no new nutrients are coming in. This triggers activation of autophage genes, specifically ATG proteins. Your cells begin to identify damaged organelles, particularly old, inefficient mitochondria. These damaged structures are engulfed into structures called autophagosomes, broken down, and their components are recycled. This is why you feel so good after an extended fast. You've literally cleared out cellular garbage and replaced it with new, efficient machinery. Your mitochondria are producing more ATP with less oxidative stress. Less free radical damage means less inflammation and slower aging at the cellular level. This also has cancer prevention implications. Autophagy clears out damaged proteins that could accumulate and cause DNA mutations. It's one of your body's quality control mechanisms. Second, stem cell mobilization. During fasting, your existing immune cells are conserved and damaged ones are recycled. But when you refeed, when you break your fast, there's a surge of stem cells released from your bone marrow into circulation. These pluripotent cells can differentiate into whatever your body needs: new immune cells, repair cells for tissues, endothelial progenitor cells that repair blood vessel damage. This is why people who fast regularly tend to have better immune function. They get fewer infections, recover faster, and have healthier vasculature. Your blood vessels are constantly being damaged by blood pressure, oxidative stress, and inflammation. Endothelial progenitor cells repair this damage. Fasting increases their production. Third, the gut microbiome shifts. Your gut contains trillions of bacteria, your microbiome. The composition of these bacteria affects your inflammation levels, your insulin sensitivity, and even your mood and cognition through the gut-brain axis. When you fast, particularly in the first 24 to 48 hours, bacteria that depend on constant sugar supply die off. These tend to be the problematic species associated with inflammation and metabolic dysfunction. The keystone species, beneficial bacteria like Akkermansia and Bifidobacterium, survive and thrive during fasting. Over weeks of regular fasting, your gut microbiome diversity improves. A diverse microbiome is associated with better metabolic health, lower inflammation, and reduced visceral fat. There's also a connection to intestinal permeability, leaky gut. An unhealthy gut lining allows bacterial components like lipopolysaccharide or LPS to cross into your bloodstream. LPS triggers massive inflammatory responses. When it reaches your liver through the portal vein, it promotes fatty liver disease. Fatty liver worsens insulin resistance, which drives more visceral fat accumulation. It's a vicious cycle. Fasting gives your gut lining time to heal. Your intestinal epithelial cells turn over every few days, but they need energy and resources for repair. When you're constantly eating, your gut is constantly working on digestion. During fasting, that energy can be redirected to repair. The tight junctions between cells, the barriers that prevent intestinal permeability, can be restored. Reducing leaky gut means less systemic inflammation, which directly impacts visceral fat loss. When LPS and inflammatory molecules aren't constantly flooding your system, your body can finally shift out of inflammatory fat storage mode and into fat burning mode. Let me give you exactly what to do starting today. Day 1 to 3, calculate your eating window. Look at when you typically eat your last meal. Add 12 hours to that time. That's when you'll break your fast for the first few weeks. Download a fasting tracker app like Zero or the Fasting Tracker app. These help you stay accountable and visualize your fasting windows. Buy a food scale if you don't have one. Start measuring your protein portions. Most people dramatically underestimate how much protein they're actually eating. Hitting that 1.6 to 2.0 grams per kilogram target is critical for preserving muscle. Take your baseline measurements today. Waist circumference, weight, photos. You need a starting point to measure progress against. Execute 12-12 fasting every single day. No exceptions for the first week. You're building the habit. Schedule 2 resistance training sessions. Even if you've never lifted weights, start now. Bodyweight exercises work if you don't have gym access. Push-ups, squats, lunges, planks. Track everything. Write down what you eat, when you eat, how you feel. Tracking creates awareness and accountability. Now, let me be completely honest with you about what fastest actually means. This protocol is the fastest lifestyle-based approach to burning visceral fat. It's faster than traditional calorie restriction because it targets the root hormonal cause, insulin-driven fat storage. It's faster than exercise alone because it combines the metabolic benefits of fasting with the muscle-preserving and energy expenditure benefits of resistance training and HIIT. It specifically mobilizes visceral fat first because of the biochemical properties of visceral adipocytes. But let's be clear about what this doesn't do. This is not a magic bullet. You will not see results overnight. The first 2 to 3 weeks are adaptation. Your body is learning to efficiently mobilize and burn fat for fuel. You might feel some fatigue, some hunger as your hormones adjust. But if you execute consistently, if you follow the fasting protocol, hit your protein target, train with intensity, sleep 7 to 9 hours, manage your stress, you will see measurable changes within 3 to 4 weeks. By week 12, the transformation will be dramatic. This protocol doesn't work if you don't execute consistently. You can't fast Monday through Friday and then eat freely all weekend and expect results. You can't skip your resistance training sessions and wonder why you're losing muscle along with fat. Consistency is everything. This is a metabolic reset based on how your body is actually designed to function. Humans evolved alternating between periods of feasting and fasting. Modern constant eating is the aberration. We're simply returning to our natural physiological state. Let me tie this all together with the actual science I've shown you. We know from 2024 research that 16-8 time-restricted eating produces 11 to 27% visceral fat reduction over 5 to 48 weeks. We know from meta-analyses that HIIT significantly reduces visceral and abdominal fat. We know from studies on metabolic syndrome patients that high-resistance training accelerates visceral fat loss faster than moderate endurance training alone. We understand that lowering insulin through fasting removes the biochemical brake on lipolysis. Visceral fat, with its higher density of beta-adrenergic receptors, is mobilized first. Exercise amplifies this through catecholamine release and improved insulin sensitivity. Sleep and stress management optimize cortisol and growth hormone. The combination creates a synergistic fat-burning environment that targets the most dangerous fat in your body. This matches exactly what clinicians like Dr. Pradeep Jammas have observed in thousands of patients over decades of practice. The physiology is sound. The evidence is strong. The results are reproducible. This is the #1 fastest way to burn dangerous visceral fat because it addresses the root cause, insulin-driven metabolic dysfunction, not just the symptom of excess calories.